Welcome to the Practical NLP Podcast with me, Andy Smith. My guest this week is Duff McDuffee from BoulderHypnosisWorks.com. For my money, Duff is one of the most thoughtful people in modern NLP. He specialises in helping creative and neurodivergent people who think different, as that classic Apple ad used to say. In particular, Duff has a new workshop starting on May the 18th, Transforming Money Fears Masterclass, and that's what's sponsoring this episode. Now, if you've seen publicity for workshops around transforming limiting beliefs around money before, you might be thinking, oh yeah, more law of attraction stuff. But when you hear what Duff says in this episode, you'll know that it's going to be a lot more evidence-based. Stay tuned for a very special offer on this workshop at the end of this episode. In our wide-ranging conversation, we talk about Tony Robbins, cults, some of Duff's techniques for learning from criticism, reframing failure, and the importance of joy and motivation. Plus, he shares an easy pattern interrupt technique that you can use to get yourself out of a stressful state. So, let's get into the conversation with Duff McDuffee.
Okay, yeah. So, Duff, welcome to the Practical NLP Podcast. I think we've been connected on Facebook for about 10 years or something.
Wow.
Never actually spoken before, I believe.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me on, Andy.
Okay, well, I'm in Trignac in the beautiful Limousin in France. Whereabouts are you?
In Boulder, in Boulder, Colorado, here in the United States. Beautiful mountain town.
Yeah, I think that's figured in a lot of films, TV shows, and literature. So I think most listeners will have a rough idea of where that is and maybe even what it's like.
Yeah.
Have you always been there?
No, I grew up in Midwest in St. Louis, Missouri, and moved out here about 23 years ago now. So I have been here for half my life, and it's been a great place. Just a lot of NLP, actually. The Steve and Connirae Andreas were out here, and Connirae still is. Steve passed on, but a very amazing school of NLP, which I actually connected with at one point and have done marketing for as well. So connected to that tradition, and we got a lot of meditation and yoga, and some of that's really great, and some of that's pretty woo-woo and out there. We've got cults, we've got the whole spectrum.
Okay, all human life is there. So Steve Andreas, I guess Steve and Connirae actually are probably about my favorite writers on NLP. I've never actually met them or seen them train, but I believe they edited the early or most of the early Bandler and Grinder books, and quite possibly made them readable.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
Steve was the main editor on those, and really, but I think Connirae as well gathered those transcripts from early NLP trainings. This was the late 70s, I think even into the early 80s, and NLP was just coming on the scene, and Bandler and Grinder were putting on these trainings, and the Andreases would bring them out to Boulder. They would sponsor their trainings. And then record the things and go through this transcripts painstakingly. Of course, now you can have AI do all this, right? But they'd go through the transcripts painstakingly and edit them into readable text. So yeah, some of those early books, Frogs into Princes, Transformations, these sorts of things, were published by Real People Press, which was Steve and Connirae's book publishing company, and they edited from multiple live trainings into just make it sound like just one, so that you get the experience of being in the room.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend those books if you can still get hold of them, because I think some of them are out of print from time to time.
Yes.
I don't know if they've been put into ebook form, but if you ever see them in a secondhand bookshop, certainly snap them up. They've got those kind of swirly hippie covers, haven't they?
Fantastic.
Very much of their time.
Psychedelic.
Really great books. Yeah.
And then go ahead.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, and then Steve and Connirae created their own training company out here called NLP Comprehensive. They eventually sold that off, but they were doing NLP trainings of their own style, and that's where they started writing their own books like Heart of the Mind and Change Your Mind to Keep the Change and these sorts of things that were really, laying out all these techniques that were emerging from NLP. And a lot of what Steve and Connirae were doing were modeling, how people do what they do successfully. Like, for instance, they had a training where they asked people if anybody had grieved successfully. Basically, they lost somebody in their life, but they still felt connected to them rather than distraught and despair and so on. And so they found people who had strategies like this, and they modeled them very precisely using NLP tools so they could teach those to other people and end up creating this whole litany of techniques as a result.
So for any NLP practitioners listening who haven't seen this, I believe there's an article on is it steveandreas.com, his website?
Yeah, that's still up, even though Steve has passed.
Grief articles,
He's got lots of great articles. Yeah, one of them's on the grief pattern, and many articles on other things from sort of the classic Andreas NLP school of thought here. Steve in particular is very logically minded, a master's in chemistry, and so he did a great job of sort of creating NLP recipes. Now, NLP is not just about recipes, obviously. It's it's about the creativity and the attitude, which Richard Bandler often talks about. But there's something to be said for a great recipe. Like, if you're not a cook, you can just find the ingredients, follow the steps, and have an amazing meal. And so having these step-by-step processes, which are really built on modeling other people's experiences, can be very, very helpful, at the very least, to just get a more likely successful result, or as a place to start experimenting from.
Yeah, and it wasn't just logical analysis. He really used them as well, and had a great experience of working with clients and trainees and so on. So I remember probably a series of articles that he did, for example, looking at all the examples of swish pattern demos and tutorials out there on YouTube, and basically dissecting them and showing where they're going wrong in a lot of cases. So kind of pulling it back to where it is and how it should be working. So that's a really useful corrective. And I think some of that stuff's still out there on the internet as well.
Yeah, I think that's still out on the blog there.
Yeah. Anyway, it's not supposed to be a kind of memories of the Andreas' podcast. So I will ask you though. You were working for them for a while, I think. So I still do. I still do some marketing for the Andreases as well. So right.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering what's the best thing or the most useful thing that or the greatest thing that you learned from working with them?
That's a fantastic question. There are many things. I think probably the top two, I'll say. One is just the values that Steve and Connirae and even Mark Andreas and Tamara Andreas just embody. The Andreases almost had their own little mini culture.
Yeah.
Like every family, I suppose, and just way of doing things. But a lot of what's happening in their little culture are these wonderful values that they've actually embedded in their NLP techniques. For instance, we talk about ecology in NLP, which means not, studying plants and, animals, but it means the interaction of all the parts in a system. And in particular, when you're doing change, are you accounting for objections? Are you accounting for any negative side effects this might have, and so on? And that's a value that really involves caring, right? Caring for all parts of yourself, or caring for other people. And the Andreases really embody that just in their work and just who they are as people. So just being around them is like is really relaxing and healing and wonderful in many ways. They're ordinary people. They have their flaws and pros and cons like everyone else. But they also have a basic kind of kindness that just runs through everything they do, whether they're training or coaching or just hanging out with them and having a meal. It's that's been probably the main thing. And then in terms on the NLP side, in terms of technical mastery and so on, one of the things I really picked up from the Andreas may have been 10 years ago now. But I was using a lot of the same techniques that they teach, but sometimes I wouldn't get results with clients. And I was like, what's the difference? Luckily, they've recorded a lot of their demos and trainings. And so I was watching some of these. And what I noticed is just, even though they had the step-by-step instructions, they were going off script, no problem. That wasn't a problem for them. And in particular, they had this kind of gentle persistence. So they tried the standard way, and it wouldn't quite work. If I ran into that, I'd maybe try one more thing and then just give up and be like, oh, this technique doesn't work, or there's something wrong with me. But they would be like, oh, interesting. And they get really curious about what that feedback was. And, just keep trying things with this experimental attitude and this persistence of like, this is going to work. And so they might try 7 things, but really fast in 5 minutes, right? And so then they'd get the result and they'd be like, great, successful demo. And it took me a while to realize that was something they were doing. They weren't necessarily teaching explicitly. Is just, if one thing doesn't work, just try something else, right? Just try something else and just play around with it and be curious. There's even some demos where Steve did with people off the street who had no NLP training. And in a couple of them, he just stops in the middle and he's like, I don't know what to do right now. He just says it out loud. He's just like, I don't know what to do right now. And he thinks for maybe 10 seconds. And then he suggests something and tries something new. So just that humility to be like, we don't have all the answers. But what about this?
Yeah, and I'm sure they weren't trying things kind of at random, except if they were really, really desperate and up against it. The clients' responses would have been giving them indications all the time, consciously or unconsciously, about where to go with this. This is one of my pet peeves when you see in NLP groups and NLP forums online where people are saying, well, I've got a client with this, they've come off a NLP practitioner course, which is maybe not very many days long, and they started seeing clients, which is, I don't know, I would say it's slightly alarming, but they're probably still better trained than I was on my original crap hypnotherapy training. And they're like, well, I've got a client with this problem. What technique should I be using? And so all these people who have never seen the clients, have no interaction with them, are all suggesting techniques. Yeah. It's not about the techniques. They kind of need, well, I always suggest that they need to find out the structure of the problem and how the client's doing it. And then that will make it really, really obvious what technique to use. And
exactly. Yeah, I used to try to plan out my sessions. I'd get, a free consultation and I'd hear a little bit about the problem and I'd be like, oh, okay, what techniques? Yeah, what techniques? And I'd sort of like, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And then I'd actually start talking with the client and doing some information gathering with the meta model or with just asking questions. And 9 out of 10 times I'd throw out my plan entirely because someone would say, oh, it's like a part of me is like this and a part of me. Oh, okay. So let's talk about parts. Or they'd say, I don't know. I just see myself doing this. Like, oh, okay. So there's a visual submodality that we might explore. So yeah, having the techniques, handy is helpful. Have a toolbox that you can reach in and oh, I think this is a hammer, or I think this is a hammer situation because we have a nail. That's great. And then you hit it and you're like, oh, oops, it's a screw. Okay, well, all right, let me get the screwdriver out. So it's helpful to have the techniques and know how to do them, but it's that flexibility in responding to what actually is happening.
Noticing what's going on. Again, in my original crack hypnotherapy training, which wasn't NLP or even Ericksonian, it largely used to work off scripts. So, the therapist would be like reading the script and probably not noticing huge amounts of information that the client was giving off because they're just not looking at them.
Yes. Right. Yeah, I often say I think why NLP is actually more effective than many other things, it's because we're actually paying attention.
Yeah.
We're actually responding to what's happening. So we're running that tote loop, that test. We're testing to see how is it now, and then we're operating, we're trying something, and we're testing again to see if that worked, sometimes within a few seconds, just by a gesture or a facial expression.
And making the effort to actually attain some kind of rapport with the client as well, without which they won't be giving you much information anyway. So, or possibly actively fighting you or putting up defenses. Yeah. So I also notice over the years from stuff that you've posted on Facebook that you are quite, what should we say? You mentioned cults in Boulder and elsewhere, and this is a thing that you've often warned people against or flagged up. Some guru is not really behaving in a very ethical way or whatever. Do you want to say a bit about that whole thing in general, or where that's come from? Or?
Yes, well, I've had the unfortunate experience of having real-life experience with cults. Ultimately, in some ways, it could be a positive, but at the time, it certainly was not. My introduction to NLP was with Tony Robbins, who some might say is a great NLP trainer, and some might say some other things. My personal experience was that he did know some good NLP techniques. He didn't call them that. He had renamed to like neuroassociative conditioning, NAC, perhaps due to some copyright things with Richard Bandler, who was trying to protect the NLP name for himself. But, NLP is through and through what Tony Robbins does as a speaker and as a trainer. He's clearly facilitating NLP coaching sessions in his live trainings and so on. And I'm not sure he understands the principle of ecology, at least the way I understand it, in that he's very, very aggressive. He has a very aggressive sales pitch, even within his training for his advanced training. He really goes after it. And when there's resistance that comes up, he doesn't welcome that like the Andreas is, very gently, and try to see the positive intention. Just kind of barrels over it. He even does some stuff with submodalities that's like, you take the bad part, you decrease all the submodalities, you make it black and white and small, and make the good part like bright and colorful and big, and you do visual squash more like a hierarchy, like the good part smashes the bad part. So that's one way to do NLP, but it's very aggressive. And I found that when I was personally into Tony Robbins stuff, I'm not going to say this is Tony Robbins' fault, but when I was into Tony Robbins stuff, I find myself sort of unconsciously modeling his way of being. And what really woke me up to what was going on one time is I was talking with somebody about something. I don't even know what it was, but we were in a little bit of an argument. They were disagreeing with me, and I suddenly got really Tony Robbins, like over the top, enthusiastic about my position. And he backed down like I had just yelled at him. He was like, "Whoa, man, okay." And I was like, "Oh, I thought I was just being really excited, but actually I was being really aggressive." And I don't want to be that. I don't want to bowl people over and just, push them into thinking the way I think. That's just that's not in line with my values. So I didn't like being like that. And I also pushed myself really, really hard when I was into Tony Robbins stuff to the point of burnout, just by, sort of high achieving, rah, get into a
This
peak
is the
state.
I've never been to one of these
peak state.
probably rallies. Is that the right word? I don't know. Probably not. That's not what they call it. But
that's probably accurate.
Yeah.
Revivals.
I have been to the one meeting of the Yes Group in London, which is like a pale shadow, I guess. But Tony Robbins fans, and people in a peak state, and they're really kind of rah-rahed up. So everything that you learn, if we're talking about state-dependent memory, everything you learn in that peak state, when you go back to your normal life, does that kind of go away again? Do you forget it? And or do you try and stay in the peak state all the time and just like burn out?
Yeah, that's what I tried to do. I tried to stay in the peak state all the time by just pumping myself up, like literally like yelling and pushing my hands over my head and stuff, because that's what he instructs in his live experience, to unleash the power within thing, which is like a rock concert more than a training. And it was very unsustainable for me. It was, what goes up must come down. If anything, it made me crash more into low energy and depression, even chronic fatigue that took a long time to untrain myself from. And the way I did it actually was through methods from the Andreases, that especially core transformation. It's a very powerful technique that really embodies this NLP presupposition that all parts of us have some positive intention.
Yeah.
So there's no bad part you're trying to get rid of and good part you're trying to win. It's not like your upper drives versus your lower drives, or self-discipline. All of these concepts involve
self-mastery.
A parts conflict. Yeah. Self-mastery. Yeah. And then there's a slave part of you. Is that it? So core transformation really approaches every part the same way, treating it with respect and kindness, seeing that there's a positive intention, and going deeper with those positive intentions until you get to some, what we call core state, which is a state of being. It sounds cheesy, but things like peace, love, joy, when you're actually experiencing them, are very healing and wonderful. And that starts to reorient your whole experience. So I did hundreds of sessions of core transformation on myself over the course of 2 or 3 years, which helped me to really heal from that way of pushing and striving and overfunctioning that I learned from Tony Robbins. But honestly, Tony Robbins in some ways is just a reflection of the wider culture, especially American entrepreneurial culture, but it's all around the world now. Sometimes we call it hustle culture, right? You just got to push and grind and hustle and work all the time.
Wake up
never take any breaks.
4 a.m.
And you'll be successful.
Yeah, all that.
Take an ice bath and then run 20 miles. Yeah. So that's the sort of thing I was doing at the time in my 20s, listening to Tony Robbins tapes at the time, audio tapes, and then CDs. Now we don't have any of those. But getting myself hyped up. In some ways that worked, but it was, I try to compare it to like burning coal for energy. It's like burning coal for energy does release a lot of energy. Sure, also pollutes the oceans with mercury that gets into fish and pollutes the air and so on. And so pushing and forcing ourselves like that, to me, is a one-way ticket to burnout. And but luckily there is another way. We don't actually have to live that way from that stress state all the time.
But we probably wouldn't go so far as to describe Tony Robbins as a cult in the kind of classical sense or dictionary definition.
Cults are a fascinating thing. Yeah, I think originally we referred to sort of live-in communities where people abandoned their families and gave all of their money and possessions over to the guru and so on. But the whole kind of community is, the thinking around cults has been evolving over time because these new things have been emerging that don't quite fit that mold. So yeah, in a classical sense, you wouldn't call Tony Robbins' community a cult, but go to one of his trainings sometime and talk with the volunteers. Oh boy, it kind of sounds like it. I remember one guy who we're talking with at the training who was a crew member. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but for some reason he was talking about eating fast food and so on. And he said something like, eating a Big Mac, it costs more calories to digest that in your body than you eat. And I looked right at him and I said, I don't think that's true. So there were a lot of just like weird ideas floating around. Now, I'm not saying everybody in the Tony Robbins community believes that particular thing, but there was a lot of strange stuff going on surrounding all of this. And it was kind of distorted and odd in a way that you'd be like, did you just join a cult? And I think people thought I joined a cult. And it was really hard to get out of this way of thinking. There was a lot of conditioning in these trainings, a lot of conditioning into a particular line of thinking that personally didn't work for me. Maybe it works for somebody else, but that was not a sustainable fuel source for me or a sustainable way to live. And then I also joined another group that was maybe a little bit more cult-like even. A spiritual philosopher named Ken Wilber used to live here in Boulder and then moved down to Denver and had a community here in Boulder. And I worked for him for a couple of years in my 20s as well, while I was into Tony Robbins. So I was into two cult-like groups at the same time. Now, a spiritual philosopher, he's written a lot of books. It seems like that wouldn't be very cult-like, but it was very weird from day one. It was very much about like, we're going to bring in the new integral age. We're the special chosen people. And there was a lot of hobnobbing with celebrities and politicians and strange stuff going on. And there was also this whole map of reality. So Ken Wilber, I'm not going to describe his whole philosophy, but a lot of it has to do with higher consciousness and getting into sort of a higher level of consciousness he calls integral. That's beyond sort of liberal and conservative, for instance, politically. It's like an integration beyond that and so on. It sounds really great on paper. Just really
to interject here,
a lot of wonderfully
a lot of, I don't know what it was like in America, but a lot of the NLP world in the UK in the late 90s, maybe early 2000s, were very, very taken with Ken Wilber and his ideas. So big influence.
Yes. Yeah. And I got into him just a little later than that. Actually, I originally read one of his books in the 90s when I was in high school. And I thought, wow, this guy's a genius. And I think he actually is a genius. But he had some other, elements that made for, unfortunately, a very unpleasant community to be a member of. But anyway, so this idea of higher consciousness on paper sounded really good. In practice, it meant when he didn't like somebody, they were lower of consciousness and expelled from the community. And he had some tendencies, some personality things that were really, hard to get along with sometimes.
Being human.
Yeah, fascinating character.
Yeah.
But very charismatic. Yeah. Being human, very charismatic, but also would, yell at people for hours kind of thing in the office and so on. And so kind of
I guess if you're surrounded by adoring admirers and nobody ever says no to you, it would kind of go to most people's head, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always a question, chicken and egg, right? Like, is it that you're surrounded by adoring fans or is it that you could never take no for an answer, which is why you're surrounded by adoring fans? It's probably a mix of both, and they kind of interact. Yeah, but certainly being closed to feedback. And this is, I think, where that perspective of like being aggressive towards some part of you and so on. It's like, whenever we're closed to feedback, some part of us is bad or from the outside, some information we can't take in, that tends to lead to more rigidity and then also this aggression or defensiveness of our position. Now, of course, we're all capable of this as human beings. I certainly am. I don't always want to take in critical feedback either. But it's a matter of extent, I suppose. Like if we're completely closed down and we're like, especially if we're causing harm, for instance, if I'm causing harm to you and you're telling me and I'm like, no, you're the problem. Okay, but that's not going to be helpful.
So what happened after that? I'm guessing this wasn't so kind of serious that you had to extricate yourself, but or was it?
Well, I didn't have to extricate myself in maybe the traditional sense, but in a minor sense, yes. My whole community, my friends, and so on, were all involved in the integral community. And so when I pulled out and I started doing something else, which is actually working for the Andreases, I found that a lot of those friends didn't want to talk to me anymore. They didn't like me. They would tell me nasty things. I would try not to send back nastiness to them, but it was really hard. And so for several years, I actually had a blog. It was a group blog called Beyond Growth. We don't have that up anymore, but I was kind of trying to make sense of how did I get hooked into all of this stuff? What happened? What's going on with personal development and spirituality that this is so sticky, even for someone I consider myself smart. People tell me I'm smart. I was surrounded by smart people in both of these communities, smart, passionate people who wanted to make a difference in the world. How are we vulnerable to this? And so I did a lot of writing, a lot of processing, a lot of core transformation with all of this stuff. And, started to get some clarity that there's these like different ways of being, or different paradigms, belief systems, whatever you want to call them, value systems. And, to be very rough with it, we could just say there's two. No, that's not true. But we could say there's two ways of seeing things. One is like this aggressive kind of way of being, where you need to get rid of the bad and raise up the good to dominate the bad, something like that. And we see that internally and in the world, right? There's parenting styles where, the goal of a good parent is to tell your children what to do and to punish them when they don't. Or management styles where the goal is to, I'm the boss. I tell you what to do. You do what I say or you're fired, right? And that's a whole style. And then there's a whole different way of doing things, which doesn't make any sense from this other perspective. It's like the parenting style of, I'm going to treat my children with love and respect and not force them to do things, but keep working until we are doing the appropriate thing, whatever that is. Or management style, where you're focusing mostly on what's going well, the appreciative inquiry kind of thing that you teach. You're mostly focusing on what's really working as a team. Oh, and this thing didn't work, and let's see if we can work through this with kindness and compassion, treating workers with respect. These two paradigms or ways of being, they almost don't make sense to each other. like they're kind of like, who are you? This is bizarre. But like the Andreas NLP school is like this second kind of thing. It's like, oh, all parts of you are good. They just have some strategy that's not working right now. But it's not a bad part. We want to include this information, and then we'll have something like wholeness or alignment. So you see words like wholeness, and Connirae Andreas now has this method called the wholeness work, which goes even kind of beyond core transformation, and or alignment or ecology, and what I'm really started to realize is this whole way of doing things, is kind of stress free, whereas the other way is about like fear and pain and pushing and aggression. Yeah, it's kind of fight or flight. Whereas other way of doing things is out of joy and love and curiosity and exploration. And so I've been actually just recently, the last couple of years, writing a book that kind of differentiates these paradigms or different ways of doing things. It's called The Joy of Doing, Redesigning Work to Work for Everyone. Not out yet, but it will be hopefully this year. And it's all about getting into this new way of doing things I call the progress paradigm. So you can make progress in lots of different ways, but if we make progress through joy, through possibility, we're not stressed as we're doing the thing. We're not sacrificing now for later necessarily, because we're actually enjoying the process of whatever it is. Versus this old way of doing things called the punishment paradigm, which is mostly motivating ourselves and others through fear and pain. If you don't follow the rules, you get punished. If I overeat, I'll punish myself with exercise. This sort of thing that's very unpleasant. It might work, like coal works for getting energy, but you could use wind or solar or something else that's more renewable?
So this sounds like it's kind of mapping slightly onto the George Lakoff's idea of political frames. I think he calls the authoritarian one the strict father paradigm. I forget what he calls the other one.
Nurturing parent.
And there may not be exact map-ons, but certainly elements there, I think. Probably what saves the nurturing one, at least as you're doing it, and the Andreases are doing it, from being just like let people get away with anything and being a doormat and so on, is
that's the objection, right?
But at the same time, as far as I can see, both they and you are very focused on what actually works and evidence. I remember, I don't know if it's still active now, but a few years back you had a website called Scientific Goals that looked at all the research about goal setting and what worked.
Yeah, I think I may have taken that website down, but I was really interested in that for a while. I was going deep into what actually works for achieving goals. What is a goal? Like, where does the idea of goals even come from? So I was really going deep into this. And one of the things I discovered is that almost everybody thinks of goals in this very naive way. I call it the naive goal model, including me. I think we all kind of default to this, which is set a goal, right, where I want to be, create a plan, then execute on that plan. Then you'll have success. Sounds very logical, right? Set a goal, plan, execute on the plan, success. Unfortunately, it almost never works that way. Like, we set a goal based on limited information from our current point of view. Often that goal is wildly bizarre. Like, it doesn't actually make any sense or meet our needs or anything. I want to make $1 billion. Okay. Really, I want to feel safe, so it doesn't even matter how much money it is. Then we create a plan. The plan is based on knowing nothing because we're trying to do something new. So it's often totally illogical and none of the steps make any sense, but we don't know that until we actually start doing something. Execute on the plan. Most of our plans fail because we can't execute on the plan. That's the main problem, right? Like, it's not that complicated to get trim and fit and lose weight. It's very, very simple, actually, but it's very difficult. Almost nobody can execute on that plan. And then we'll have success. Well, a lot of times we execute even correctly on the plan and we don't get the ultimate result we want. So, not to be pessimistic or nihilistic or anything, there's actually a much better way of doing this. It's actually really fun and engaging, which is more like how people do things in the world of design. There's a whole area called design thinking. Design thinking uses multiple stages that are kind of non-linear. They call them non-linear and iterative. So non-linear means they can kind of go in different orders. You kind of bounce around to different things. And iterative, you kind of do them more than once based on when you learn and get new information. So there's this organization out in California here in the United States called IDEO. They're very popular in the design world.
Okay.
IDEO. And they're a consulting company that teaches this design thinking along with other people who teach design thinking. But they often get consulted to work on really hard problems, which in the design world they call wicked problems. It's like you don't have any clue how to solve this thing. It's like a systemic problem with all these weird interlocking factors. And they just jump right in, knowing nothing. And what they don't do is this naive goal model. We have a goal, we're going to create a plan, we're going to execute a plan, success. What they do is they create a prototype that's pretty crappy, like very quickly, within like a week or a day or something. And then they go test it and they try to get real feedback from the people actually involved. This is actually what we do in NLP all the time. We create a crappy prototype of something, we throw it out, and the client responds, or we respond for doing it ourselves. And we go, that doesn't really work. But why? That becomes useful information. So this design thinking approach, we can start without knowing anything And what we try to do is get like real data, real feedback as soon as possible in these tight little feedback loops, which allows us to, say, is this the generally right direction to go? And we learn really quickly, nope, that's a terrible direction to go. So then we can go in the right direction, or, some other direction. But we get feedback successively in these iterative feedback loops. That's a way better way. And it's actually more fun than just executing on a plan and following all the steps. The only reason we try to do the old way is fear, basically. We're afraid that if we just jump right into something we don't understand, we're going to mess up, we're going to fail, that's correct. We are going to fail. But that's not a problem. In NLP, we say there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. Nice expression. But, embodying that, learning to actually feel like it's safe to fail, that's the practice. But if we can really do that, then we can just launch in and try things and figure it out as we go.
There's a similar idea in the appreciative inquiry world. This guy called Jervis Bush, who's probably my favorite appreciative inquiry writer, he talks about what he calls generative leadership as a way of dealing with what you described as wicked problems, where you haven't got all the information, you can't see all the causal relationships, there isn't a best practice established. So all you can do is frame the problem in a way that, this is like organizational change we're talking about now rather than individual goal setting, but frame the problem in such a way that it engages everyone involved who probably they're contributing to the problem without realizing it as a part of a system. Engage everyone involved in coming up with ideas for making some progress. And so you end up with a load of ideas. You don't know which ones are going to work. You try them out in a limited and kind of fairly safe way. You drop the ones that don't work and you keep and build on the ones that do work. So you kind of move towards where you want to get to in a iterative kind of way. It's very similar. Whereas the old way, I think, that comes from command and control organizations, and you should be able to do everything, do what your guru tells you, even if it's a NLP guru, and it's like that military thing of no plan survives first contact with the enemy, or Mike Tyson says everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, I think.
Exactly. And we get punched in the mouth by the world constantly.
So that way of doing it, that iterative way, that design thinking way, is much more realistic, actually, because you're learning. Even if you do fail, you learn from it, as we say in NLP. Yeah,
exactly. And so what I've been discovering, I think I'm discovering this at least. Maybe I'm deluded, but I think I'm discovering that there's similar principles at different levels in systems. So on the individual internal level, on the sort of interpersonal, relational level, group level, organizational change level, we find similar things. Like in organizational change, there's a similar principle that we could use for personal goal setting or design thinking or all these kinds of things. And so what I'm writing about in my book and what I've been thinking very deeply about is, what are these principles that could create this new way of doing things that people are actually already doing, right? The Andreases have been doing it since the 80s. People have been doing organizational change work in this way for probably 30, 40, 50 years too, So it's not that I'm inventing this stuff. I'm just, as a former philosophy major, I'm looking for the principles, the philosophy of this that can be applied on numerous levels to create what I call the joy of doing, so that we can enjoy the process and get the result. It's not like letting people off the hook, including yourself, because you ultimately do want a result. You want to see if this actually works. But why suffer the whole time and then in the hopes that you'll be happy once you get the result? We know that doesn't work.
And also that I think just in terms of persistence and resilience and keeping going, I think you need some joy in there, unless you're I guess unless you're trying to escape from something which is so horrible that you've got loads and loads of away from motivation, or you're getting away from motivation from
Right.
like a boss or a really strict personal trainer or something, where bad things will happen if you don't
Right.
take those steps. If it's just you there on your own trying to do it for yourself,
Yeah.
you need
Exactly.
you need some joy in there. Otherwise, realistically, it's not going to keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And one way of sort of describing these two paradigms, the punishment paradigm is primarily away from motivation, right? It's you do this or else. There's a threat. There's going to be fear or punishment. That can work to get into action. It's not that it doesn't work. It's that, but it mostly says what not to do, right? And so it also associates a lot of pain with the situation and the actions you're taking. Whereas this sort of progress paradigm we might think of as moving towards motivation. The whole philosophy, if you create a whole philosophy of life based on moving towards motivation, what would it look like? Well, it'd be extremely joyful. You'd be clear about what you want. You'd be iterating and improving in all these kinds of design thinking ways. And it'd be really wonderful for you and everyone around you. And ideally, you'd also get progress towards what you want and achieve your goals. So it's not whether you achieve your goals either way. It's actually that there's just a better way to achieve your goals that's going to be more enjoyable.
Yeah, the motivation
side effects, but
remains. It's still there right up till you reach your goal. Whereas with away from, it's as soon as you get far enough away from what you're trying to get away from, there goes your motivation. I guess at some point you've also got to keep an eye out for things that could go wrong, or notice if things aren't working. Because
absolutely, definitely, yeah. So that needs to be built in, and I've built that in along the lines of the NLP presupposition. There's no such thing as failure, only feedback. I've created a process for how you do that experientially. Now, I probably have reinvented the wheel. There's, I'm sure, lots of things like this in business and so on. But I took the word fail, F-A-I-L, and I scrambled up the letters to recycle failures. So it's AFLY instead. And that's an acronym. It stands for A, acknowledge the truth. So you make a mistake, you fail, you don't reach your goal. Start with just acknowledging the truth without shame or blame. In NLP, that might be observer position, right? Dissociated, so you're not in it. But just objective, neutral. It's not, oh, I'm such an idiot. No, it's, I tried this and this happened. Not what I wanted. Great. F stands for forgive. So if you can forgive yourself, that could just mean be kind to yourself. But, say some nice things to yourself. Like, I'm a human being. It's okay. I tried this. Didn't work. No problem. Right? That's going to be better than beating yourself up, punishing yourself. L stands for learn something new. So what could you learn? What can you take away from that? A lot of people try to rush to learning. I used to do this, actually, when I was into Tony Robbins. I'd be like, what did I learn from this? I'd be really aggressive. But I wasn't emotionally ready because I hadn't done that acknowledgement and forgiveness part yet. But once we do that, then it's easy to learn. And I stands for iterate and improve. So we want to take our learning and do something different next time. So we're not repeating the same thing. We're not, pressing the button over and over and it's not working. But we're trying something different. And so we're not making the same mistakes, but we're learning something each time. So acknowledge the truth, forgive yourself, learn, iterate, and improve. That works really, really well, just even as a journaling prompt. For a while, I was just doing this once a day with some mistake I made.
Just like using that as a structure for your journal entries. Yeah.
Exactly. Really helpful, even for transforming the fear of failure. Because the fear of failure, I think it really comes down to we've been punished for failing. So we associate, if I fail, it's going to be pain. There's going to be punishment. So if we can associate, if I fail, I'm going to acknowledge the truth, forgive myself, learn and iterate. Oh, that's not so bad. So then we're more willing to risk things that have a high risk of failure, maybe if there's not like a huge cost to the failure, because we can just go through this process and it'll actually feel good. It'll feel like healing and connecting.
Yeah. I can see all kinds of applications for this. I can see I could see it being like an element in business appraisals, for example, or in giving feedback. I know there's a whole kind of argument against giving constructive or critical feedback, that like Marcus Buckingham, where he's saying that critical feedback is always more about the person giving the critical feedback than it is about the person receiving it. And instead, we should be looking at what they did well and how they did it, so that good job should be the start of the conversation rather than the end of it.
To me, these are two different principles in my system. One is take in the good, which is really focusing on what went well and how and so on, and appreciating that in yourself or in others. But to me, there is this element of transforming failure into feedback that's really important, because we do make mistakes and we do feel bad, and critical feedback is a lot of how we learn. Like in the growth mindset model from Carol Dweck, educational psychologist, she really points out that critical feedback is how we learn. So the key is to have that not be an unpleasant experience, but to actually have that be an enjoyable experience. Because if it's an unpleasant experience, the moving away from motivation goes attached to learning. And we're like, I don't want to learn. I don't want feedback. And that's where we get a fixed mindset. But if we don't have that, if we have like joy, curiosity, love associated with getting critical feedback, that would change everything. Then we'd be eager to seek out learning. And in fact, when we're in a growth mindset, according to Carol Dweck's research, we actually do that. We might reach out to a mentor and say, hey, can you help me to improve this process? Or seek out an editor for a book and say, tell me what's not working with this so I can make it better. So when we're actually, the question is what practice can we implement? So that becomes, I want that kind of feedback. And I think athlete.
Yeah. So you've got to be feeling reasonably secure, I think, to actually welcome that kind of feedback. So it's a way of becoming more secure about that.
Yes, exactly. And over time, when we practice that sort of thing, it gets better and better, in my opinion. At least that's what I've seen for me. And I have a group coaching class I do on Sundays, and we practice two things. One is taking in the good. What's 3 things that went well last week? So we celebrate in a group setting. So there's no envy or jealousy, right? Everyone's like, yay, that went great for you. And then we do this athlete process with one thing that didn't go according to plan, a little mistake or failure,
right?
Something like that. So then that's not shameful to have mistakes too, because we're in a group that's really supportive.
And a very good idea to have the appreciation part first, because it puts the mistakes into context.
Yeah,
and people are in a more of a
exactly. And we do more good things than critical things for that reason too. So we're not like, okay, here's 12 things I fucked up.
Because even if it was like 1 and 1, generally our brains tend to pay more attention to the negative one.
Yeah, due to that negativity bias.
Okay, so far then we've established that you've had some experience of the style of NLP that you don't want to do. You've kind of seen through cults. You've had a great kind of almost like a bit of an apprenticeship with the Andreases. You've looked at the evidence base for what works in goal setting. You're working on this book, which does sound really, really intriguing. So the thing that caught my eye recently, though, is you are going to be doing a workshop around, it's not banishing money fears, is it? But it's something to do with fears around money. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we'll do. So I'm teaching a class coming up soon here, March 18th, I think.
Around there,
We can, It's called Transforming Money Fears Masterclass.
May the 18th,
I've
right?
noticed.
Is it May? May
the 18th, yes. Not March. We're in May now. So it's the Transforming Money Fears Masterclass. So it's going to be 3 weekends, an hour and a half on Saturday. And the goal is to apply some of these NLP and hypnosis tools to transforming fears around money. Why? Well, because a lot of people I've noticed are worried about money right now. There's an economic downturn, especially, well, actually, it seems like it's everywhere. I was going to say, especially in the United States.
No, I think you're probably actually doing better than the UK for sure, and possibly most of Europe
right.
as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So it's, and yet people are still feeling it here too. So, and I've noticed this in a lot of my clients recently. In fact, it's been coming up for me, which is not a typical thing for me. But I recently had COVID for about 2 weeks. I was in bed, and that was just challenging physically. But then I noticed I had all these money fears come up because it was like my brain was like, oh, I'm going to be stuck like this forever, and I'm never going to make any money, and then I'm going to die. Right. And brains are funny that way. They try to keep us safe. So it's been coming up for me, and I was reviewing my tools. Like, what are all my tools for resolving fears and anxiety so I can really apply it to this? And as I was mapping that out, I thought, hey, other people could probably use this too. Because it actually doesn't have to be like this intense, painful courage kind of thing. That's this old paradigm. That's the old punishment paradigm where you have to face your fears and overcome them with discipline and squash them down. But we have these wonderful tools that we can actually do this in a relaxing way, an enjoyable way, in a curious way. And it can be kind of a fun thing to do. So we're going to be applying this progress paradigm, 8 principles to doing this. I also have, in some ways because of my book, come up with a new belief change process that I call mode shifting questions that we're going to do on the second day, which is getting out of these modal operators of have to and can't, especially. So when we're in this have to mode, it's like, it's pressure. I have to get this done. I have to do it in this way. It's so much stress. Or if we're in can't mode, it's like feeling helpless and sad. And I can't, I'm so stuck. So how do we get out of those modes? Well, we can start asking questions about our beliefs. Like if you have a have to belief, I have to make more money. You could say, well, do you have to believe that? And it starts to, fry your brain a little bit and get you open to new possibilities. Because there's some level in which you don't feel like you have to actually. And then you can relax around the whole thing. So we're going to be exploring some fun tools like that. And they will open up some new possibilities. That's the goal. So that we can feel more safe and optimistic around money. Because there's going to be up and down turns economically, probably for till the end of time. At least until humans are no longer around. So how can we feel more resilient given those situations so that we can make it through emotionally at the very least? Because I know some people who have a lot of money who still have money fears. So it's not necessarily that if you make $1 billion, you're going to feel like you're fine. So what if we could feel good now? And maybe that would help us to maybe take some action to bring in some more income, especially if you're, a coach, an entrepreneur, or something like that.
Yeah, because you're more capable of actually taking action that works when you are feeling at your best.
Exactly. Rather than stuck or frozen.
Yeah. I saw some research on the worries of billionaires, and they are different from us. I'm assuming you're not a billionaire yet.
I am far from it.
Far from it. Yeah, me too. So yeah, they're as worried as we are, but about slightly different things. It doesn't really make them happier.
I know, for sure.
So is there something I like to give my listeners something that they can try themselves as a kind of self exercise that they can experiment with and make their lives a little bit better? Something around money that you recommend?
Yeah. So I'll give you a link people can go to, but then I'll explain it. So I don't have it up yet as we're recording, but it should be up today or tomorrow. If you go to boulderhypnosisworks.com boulder.com/money, BOULDER, like a big rock boulder, hypnosisworks.com/money. There'll be some videos and a quick guide there. But what I'd like to suggest, you may have heard about tapping or eye movement integration or something like that.
Yeah.
There are these techniques where you think about something, in this case, maybe a money fear. You think about something, money fear, and then you go do something with your body for 2 or 3 minutes. And then you think about it again, or havening, where you're, gently touching your arms and calming yourself. But these all kind of have the same structure. So I call them pattern interrupt methods. We interrupt the pattern of, if I think this thought, I feel this way. That's one way of expressing it. So I'm going to share with you one way you can do this. So if you take one little money fear you have, not all your money fears, not all the fears you have about everything, but if you take one little thing, now you can do this just in your mind, or you can write it down on a sheet of paper, just, right in the middle, like, I don't have enough money, whatever it is, right? Draw a little circle around it on the sheet of paper. So now you sort of captured it. And then take 2 minutes to think about, when you think this thought, how does it feel? What other thoughts come up or images? And what body sensations do you notice? So thoughts, feelings, body sensations. So maybe it's tension in your face and shoulders. Maybe it's, you feel anxiety in your chest, like it's buzzing. Maybe your breathing is tight and constricted, whatever it is. And you write those things around the circle just to capture it for yourself, if you're going to do this for yourself. If someone else was facilitating you, you wouldn't have to do that. But for yourself, you can write it down because it's going to change. And you want to be able to see it. So take 2 minutes to do that. And then take 2 or 3 minutes to move your body, to actually physically stand up and move your body. What we're doing is getting out of that stuck state and getting new possibilities as a very physical metaphor. John Grinder likes to do this sort of thing. Dilts likes to do some movement too. So we're using movement as a pattern interrupt. And a very simple one that I do is called bounce, shake, flow. So for 1 minute, you kind of just bounce up and down. And you just kind of jiggle your arms and bend at the knees and just let go of any stress. Imagining it's like going down to the earth. Just letting it go and shaking it out, using your breath too to be like, And then a minute to shaking a little more vigorously, shaking out your arms, shaking your whole body, shaking your legs, just kind of moving that energy, especially if you have fear, which is like the flight in fight or flight. It's like that fear is meant to move, right? It's meant to like have you sprint away from the saber-toothed tiger. So if you're moving your body,
that adrenaline's got to go somewhere.
It's got to go somewhere. So you're shaking it out. This is what little kids do when they get upset. They're just like moving around and shaking it out. Maybe making some sounds like, silly stuff. And then flow for a minute. So you're kind of doing your best interpretation of a Tai Chi master or a hippie at a Grateful Dead concert. And you're just flowing around and getting into the flow. And you start to feel that change as if you can get into the flow with life. And then you stop. So you just do that for 3 minutes. And then you go back and you do that writing exercise again. You put the same thought, the same fear in the circle. And now how does it feel? And you might notice a big change or maybe just a little change. Either way is okay. But you write down your thoughts, feelings, body sensations now. And if it hasn't completely changed, you can do the movement 1 or 2 or 3 more rounds. Same with tapping, same with eye movement. But I think what you'll notice after you do this a few times is you feel more calm, you feel more energized. Your breathing will change. If it was held and constricted before, it'll be slow and smooth. You might get some new thoughts like, I think it'll be okay. I think I can work through this. You might remember times in the past where you're successful, and so on. It just starts to shift things. Such an easy thing you can do yourself, even once a day for 5 or 10 minutes. If you're going through a stressful time, you can always do it a little longer if you enjoy it. But it's just a simple pattern interrupt that gets that tote loop. You're testing, you're operating, you're trying something, you're testing again, you're operating. And it can be a neat little state changer.
Right. Yeah, that would definitely work. I can see how that would work.
And if you're a guitar player like Andy, you could play some riffs as the pattern you're up to, just to get some musical aspect.
Yeah. Now you're talking.
It really does work.
Yeah.
Music, song, and dance.
Yeah.
I think these were some of the original healing modalities.
Yeah, I think I don't know what I don't really know what teenagers are like these days. I guess they're more into like video games, but certainly I used to listen to huge amounts of music as a teenager, and I think something about that as well. It kind of realigns you, or
I think so.
Kind of gets you back into rhythm, as it were.
Yeah, changes your state.
Now, about this money workshop, this is probably the first one that I've come across that whole field of banish your fears about money, or how to consistently get rich and so on. That field attracts a lot of, shall we say, grifters.
Oh man, so many.
Because it's appealing to a very basic need, and people are sometimes encouraged to get into debt to pay for these ridiculous trainings. But one thing that's very apparent from all the time that I've quote unquote known you or observed what you're doing via Facebook and via stuff you've written and so on is your stuff is evidence-based, and you're very aware of all that kind of cult stuff. So if you were ever tempted to fall into it, I think you'd notice and not do it. So yeah, this is something that I can definitely recommend, I think.
Thank you. It's not going to be about using magical wish fulfillment to become a billionaire. There's no promises of income generation at all, really. And
so it's not really law of attraction type stuff.
No, I don't think that's how the world works. If only it did, that would be fantastic. But
it works for the law of attraction proponent, because if you don't get the results that they promise you, then you obviously didn't want it enough.
But why do they keep attracting all these people who don't want it enough and have poverty consciousness? It must be in them, right, according to their theory. So, but no, it's a completely different way of thinking about that whole money thing. Ideally, I think we'd actually restructure the economic system to be more just and fair. That's where I go with it.
That would be a hell of a thing, or even institute like a socialized health system, like most, or possibly
we
all
could
other
use that here in the United States.
Yeah.
So it's not magical wish fulfillment. It's transforming the stress so that we can feel safe and optimistic to actually do things in a different way. And even that, I'd love to see that idea perpetuate throughout society. Maybe restructure businesses and restructure families and so on to create safety and connection instead of doing everything from stress and fear.
Yeah. So you've got time to consider the effects on the whole system and how sustainable it is. And
yes.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So one other thing that I wanted to ask you, are you still doing kind of hypnosis and therapy and stuff for individual clients?
Yeah, I see one-on-one clients every week, doing hypnotic coaching on Zoom. And love it. I love that stuff. Just gets better.
So is that just Zoom, or do you see people face to face actually in Boulder?
I'm only doing Zoom since the pandemic, and I never decided to get an office again because I mostly have people online anyway, so it wouldn't really justify the cost. But yeah, it's on Zoom, and I do 90-minute sessions, and we can work through just about anything, but I especially like working.
I used to do 90-minute sessions. An hour is just not long enough.
It really isn't. I completely agree. And I especially like working with neurodivergent people. So people with autism, ADHD, or creative, wacky brains. Maybe don't have a label for that, because that's how my brain works as well. And
not yet, they don't.
Yeah, right. There'll always be a label,
sure they will
pathologizing label for whatever you are. But
Yeah.
I don't do the labels. I don't do the pathologizing. We just focus on your strengths and really bringing those out and your resources, and of course addressing challenges and problems as well. But really embodying this progress principle and or progress paradigm, so that we can, even if we don't get our ultimate outcome, we're having a great time and we're learning and we're feeling happier and life's just getting better and better. And hopefully we also get our outcome as a bonus. But once I've changed my attitude towards that in coaching, the process itself is really wonderful and healing.
Okay, wonderful. So let's just reiterate for the listeners where they can find you online, and where are you going to put a little description of your interrupt process, whatever you call it?
Sure. Yeah.
Out there for people.
Yeah. So I'll give it away if you get on my email list. You already got it in the podcast, but you can get this video where I guide you through. If you go to boulderhypnosisworks.com, that's my main website. And then if you go /money, that's where that will all be once I've made it today or tomorrow before we launch the podcast into the world. So boulderhypnosisworks.com /money is where you can get that little pattern interrupt process with the movement. And you'll also get a inspiring weekly email from me on Mondays. You can unsubscribe anytime, but
yeah, recommended. I get that.
Great. Yeah, I like to share content, not just sales pitches. Of course, occasionally I sell something, but I mostly try to share things that are inspiring or helpful or useful, techniques, frames, all that.
Cool. Okay. Thank you very much, Duff.
Thank
you. Good luck with the series of Money Fears workshops.
Sounds good.
I'm sure they'll be great. I guess these are the first ones you've done of these. Yep. Okay.
First ones I've done of these, but I've spent years working on anxiety and fear in myself, and really got to an incredible place with that. And so I love working with that with clients because it's just so fun. It's funny because the word anxiety itself used to give me anxiety. So a client would say, I have anxiety. I'd be like, But now a client says, I have anxiety, and I go, ooh, because I'm excited because I know it's possible. So I'm excited to apply it to this specific area, both for myself, since it's up, and helping others to transform that.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to say for the listeners is this really cool thing that you're doing. Again, unusual in the world of sort your mindset out about money, is that you aren't charging the earth for it. And also there is a sliding scale, I believe, for, if somebody really can't afford anything more. I think you've got like a floor price of $47 or something for it. And then the kind of regular price is $247. And I guess people can give even more than that if they really find they're getting value from it.
Yeah. So I wanted to make it accessible to people because, I'm kind of trying to do the opposite of getting rich off of other people's suffering. And instead,
taking their last few dollars off them.
Oh man, it's so terrible. But I want to make it accessible for people while making some money for me, of course, as well, so that I can be taking care of my needs. But if you can afford the $247, that's still a good price, I think, for the workshop. It's not crazy expensive. And if you are really in need, then $47, I will be happy to have that price as well, or anywhere in between. So there is a sliding scale rate. So I hope that everyone who wants to come can make it.
Yeah. So that's an example of you putting into action the principles that you've been talking about, which is great. Okay. Thank you very much for inspiring me to start this podcast up again after a gap of a couple of years.
I hope you'll keep with it.
I think we've got a lot of interesting and useful material there just in it's just over an hour, I think. Whether it's inspiring people to go back to those old early NLP books or check out the Andreas' work if they haven't done before, or the processes that you've shared with us and the models that you've shared with us. So thank you very much. This has been a great episode, and hopefully we'll talk more in the future.
Thank you.
So that was our conversation with Duff McDuffie. If you want a free guided experience of that money fears pattern interrupt technique that he described, go to boulderhypnosisworks.com/money. This episode was sponsored by Duff's Transforming Money Fears Masterclass that starts on May the 18th. The course is $247, but he also wants this class to be accessible for people in financial need. So he's offering it at a sliding scale and you can pay as little as $47. And if you book your place via my link at nlppod.com/money, I'll also send you the Practical NLP Podcast Collection episodes 179, which normally retails at $39.99 to say thanks. That link again is nlppod.com/money. See you next time.